Namaste and greetings. I am Fiza Mahajan, visiting researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, New Delhi, Prabhav एवं नीति अनुसंधान संस्थान नई दिल्ली. Extend a warm welcome to you all for joining us today for day 4 of the Feminist Foreign Policy Fellowship, an online international winter school program. This 3-month Immersive Leadership Certificate Training Fellowship is proudly brought to you by the IMPRI Center for International Relations and Strategic Studies and the IMPRI Gender Impact Studies Center in collaboration with the Asia Foundation. Our chair for this program is Professor Vibhuti Patel ji, visiting distinguished professor at IMPRI and former professor at Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai. We are grateful for her continued guidance and leadership. The experts for today are Professor Anuradha Chenoy, Adjunct Professor at the Jindal School of International Affairs, Jindal Global University, and former Dean at School of International Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. Professor Mariam Seedat-Khan, Certified Clinical Sociologist at the Association for Applied and Clinical Sociology, AACS, and Professor at University of KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa. And Dr. Manisha Madhava, Professor and Head at Department of Political Science, SNDT Women's University, Mumbai. We will share video recordings of each session to support flexible learning at your convenience. The guidelines document will be emailed to you after the session for your perusal. And before we start today's session, I would like to announce the housekeeping rules. It is imperative that you join the meeting on time. There will be a Q&A session after each presentation. Share your questions in the Q&A box and not in the chat box. The questions must not be posted as an anonymous attendee. Ensure that your questions are precise and refrain from making general comments in the question to save time. Now, without any further ado, I would like to request Professor Vibhuti Patel ji to start the session with her opening remarks. Over to you, ma'am.
Yeah. Thank you, Fiza, for welcoming everyone and esteemed participants and today's experts, Professor Anuradha Chenoy, Professor Mariam Seedat-Khan, and Dr. Manisha Madhava. We are going to have a really exciting sessions today. Brief recap of what all has transpired in the previous 3 days. It began with Dr. Sini Mehta, the CEO of IMPRI, providing a profile of previous 2 courses in which nearly over 1,000 participants were there. And this course also, we got applications from 1,100 participants. Ms. Nandita Barua, co-organizer of this fellowship program and head of Asia Foundation. She introduced the Asia Foundation and its work in 19 Asian countries. And she also talked about how the feminist foreign policy, which is a relatively new for the subject for the global South. And we need to bring this issue center stage because they are concerned about diversity, equity, national security, foreign policy, and securitization. And she also said that the feminist debate over last 50 years, they need to be mainstreamed in the foreign policy dialogues. My presentation was about the transnational feminist solidarity like we have seen right from 1975 International Women's Year. And we had a keynote address by Ms. Stephenie Foster, and she talked about the enthusiastic response which feminist foreign policy is receiving from global South and several countries where the debates have begun. And she talked about the 4 main pillars of feminist foreign policy, which is gender equality, broadening the definition of security that includes food, health, refugee status, problems of refugees, internally displaced people, and climate refugees. Third one is elevation of the diverse voices and the historical power imbalance. How can we use the diplomacy and foreign policy to settle to make the diplomatic relations and international relations more equitable? She also narrated the historical context of the feminist foreign policy, and she also talked about the WPS agenda. And we had a second day where Professor Sanjukta Bhattacharya, she examined the questions like of feminist foreign policy from the international relations lens, and she talked about various theories about international relations, the liberal, the realistic realism in international relations, constructivism, Marxism, neo-Marxism, and all these theorizations, they impact the decisions which the diplomats take. And she also talked about the critical and normative perspective like feminism, which got traction after 1979 when CEDAW was accepted. National Nairobi Forward-Looking Strategy were adopted in 1985, Beijing Platform for Action in 1995, and the United Nations Security Council's Resolution 1325. And she also talked about how the whole scenario changed after 9/11 tragedy, which impacted international relations greatly. And she also told about that the whole optimistic note in her presentation, where she said that when it comes to developmental assistance, certain elements of feminist foreign policies have been mainstream. The reconciliatory and pacific commitments of some of the countries, for example, in Colombia, 1,000 women signed that they wanted a pacifist feminist foreign policy, but I think that is still a dream. After that, we had Dr. Keshav Giri, who spoke on how to have international relations away from Eurocentrism. And he told this history of Eurocentrism, where he discussed the theories of John Hobson, Gayatri Spivak, Edward Said, and also talked about the decolonialism as a very important perspective to get rid of Eurocentrism and the whole worldview which Eurocentrism brings. He also talked about the question of decolonial future, which lies in decolonization of Eurocentric foreign policy, and he critiqued Jane Austen's work, No Mansfield Park, by giving example of deconstruction of that novel by Edward Said in 1993, that how the erasure and the exclusion takes place, where you talk about the history where serfs, slaves, and colonized human beings just don't exist. He also gave an example of anti-colonial struggles by some of the heroic women, for example, Yogmata of Nepal. And he also spoke admirably about the Hansa Mehta's contribution in the UDHR, where she said that all human beings are born free and equal, as against what was given in the draft that all men are born and equal. And he also talked about the question of marriage equality, for which in the UN document, it was Sharifa Hamid Ali who brought this bill, and she was one of the founders of All India Women's Conference way back in 1935. He found major contribution of feminist foreign policy in terms of shifting the discourse from national security to human security. And I think after that, he said that we can think of decolonized future through localization of feminist foreign policy. On day 3, my presentation was also on intersectionality and gender mainstreaming in Global South, and how perspective of intersectionality makes us understand the privileges and the disadvantages which different sections of society face. And if we talk about the salient features of feminist foreign policy, that should be guided by certain thumb rules of mainly the agency of women, peace agreements that are responsive to specific needs of women and girls, men and boys, and gender minorities, they are likely to contribute to sustainable peace. And there can't be peace without justice. Now, today on day 4, we have 3 extremely endowed and experienced political scientists, and we are going to have a really exciting session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Now I am honored to call upon our first expert for today, Professor Anuradha Chenoy, Adjunct Professor at the Jindal School of International Affairs, Jindal Global University, and former Dean at School of International Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, who will address us on the topic of women in war, peace, and security in South Asia. Over to you, ma'am.
It is in working mode. You can make it a slideshow mode.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for inviting me and Professor Patel and IMPRI. I'm delighted to be here. And
can you make it a slideshow mode?
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Just click on it and the bottom play start. थोड़ा सा नीचे चले जाइए. When you clicked on slideshow, just click on slideshow. नीचे मैम. Yeah. नीचे the band is opening. So the first one you have to click.
Okay. I think this is about what I.
First one. Play from start.
Okay.
Or even
just
before.
Yeah.
Okay.
Fine.
Okay, so of course, my task is made much easier because of all the earlier talks already, some of which I attended, 2 or 3 of them. And so I'm going to speak on women, war, and security. The first 2 or 3 points are going to be conceptual, and then I will focus on South Asia. So really, as far as women, war, peace, security, it has been subject to scrutiny and analysis in recent times. So it is one of the areas which is relatively new, even after international relations and gender in international relations came up. Then there has been kind of deeper analysis, but nonetheless, there has been quite a lot of analysis on it and looking into various aspects of it, and it has moved ahead. Really, earlier, this particular subject had been curtained off in history because of certain reasons. And primarily, those reasons are important to note even today, because there are a lot of people, a lot of women in a lot of countries still struggling against these barriers. While we in South Asia have moved ahead, while there are some certain of these barriers still. One is because women war have been traditionally been seen as a domain of men. And our roles as women have been defined a lot with home and hearth, whereas men's roles were defined as in the public spaces, but especially at war times and during conflict, this gets even further exacerbated and increased. And this is because of the asymmetry of power relations that men and women have always had, and in a great sense continue to have. So men were seen as protectors of land, labor, home, hearth, and also as owners. So there is always an economy concept behind all these discourses and narratives. While women were symbolized as, being caretakers, as caring and nurturing, and therefore, and as holding the honor of society. The concept of womanhood, motherhood, it gets signified as mother as nation. And women, men go out to war. This patriotism is kind of dished up because you have to uphold the honor of your country, of your woman, of the home, and homeland is a very emotional kind of subject, and it allows for whipping up of nationalism. And women held this as honor, and therefore, for the enemy other to violate honor. It was convenient to violate women. So wars were often played out on women's bodies as a consequence of this, number one, asymmetry, because of this role, because of the signification, because of the symbolism. So all of these intersect with each other. Of course, history had exceptional women scattered around it. You know, Rani Bai Lakshmi and many others, they played stellar roles even in our political system. But if you see these women, if you go and very often, you know, there was also this discourse saying, oh, we never denied women that role. But the fact is, all the women who came into these positions of power, whether it was our own leaders from South Asia, Mrs. Gandhi or Benazir or Begum Hasina, and name many, it was all in relation to famous men. So it was a relational thing that led them to this position of power. I'm not denying that they were good leaders, but the fact that they got there was not because of mobilization or because of place women had or access women had to political roles, but primarily because of their restriction to the home. And while we see that things have changed and there's women's liberation and you have Security Council Resolution 1325, you can see how this masculinity continues to be, you know, so dominant, even in the most liberated of places. You know, whenever there is patriotism, when there is this masculinity, this it comes to be repeatedly. And I'm just showing you the latest in this, really. So what happens then is with this whole idea of motherland and South Asia's has been full of armed conflicts. It may not have been the most major of wars, but it's full of armed conflicts, whether in India, in both interstate and intrastate, frozen conflicts, local conflicts, whether it was LTT and the Maoists in Nepal, Maoists in India, the Kashmir, and 100 others, liberation of Bangladesh, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Myanmar. So in all these, women have had to play, they've embodied both some kind of symbolic values, what I told you, the first conceptual points, and they've embodied a kind of nationalism. And all this has played out in all our wars. And there are these complex roles then that women actually have played when you come to see it. Of course, there is a symbolic where it's often said that our goddesses are armed. So, there's no harm in women being combatants. But the discourse during wars, and if you just see this, it reinforces this asymmetry, because this is from 2001, when there was a bit of a standoff between India and Pakistan. You could see, of course, everyone was being very patriotic, but you can see the discourse where General Musharraf said, we in Pakistan have not worn bangles and we can fight India on our own. So wearing bangles was a derogatory that, women are weak. And if men become feminized, or they have a feminized ideology, or they liberate and see women as equal, then it's like wearing bangles. And our reply was, from the Indian side, was in Punjab, where bangles are popular, people also wear the kada. So, a kind of a tit for tat masculinity was a competitive and important. Then again, you see when you had Obama bin Laden and the 9/11 attacks, where, it was shown, and this poster was held up, and this is from Afghanistan, Pakistan, etc., these posters, where Obama was shown to be muscular, whereas Musharraf and Biden also shown to be a woman, that, look, we have won. So continuously, whenever there is an element of conflict, the discourse turns to, masculinity, muscularity, force, etc. Then again, when you had Kargil, and this discourse is common to both men and women, because there's patriotism, the country's at war, and motherhood becomes very important and it enthuses. So there was in this Kargil whole story about how mothers encouraged their sons to fight, how the Kargil martyrs, died with their mother on their lips, and how motherhood and nationhood was so important. But in this, again, what happened, and women in other places also, not just India, in the LTT, there were lots of articles on martyrdom and that how women, that is how they could be equal. And women and with this discourse, women to become equal started feeling that they can also be part of militias, and that was a bad phase when in Nepal or in Jharkhand and in Sri Lanka, a lot of women did join militias. So what happens then is there is a great militarization of civil society. Now, I want to say one thing, that I am not opposed to militaries or armies. They have a role in states. What I'm opposed to is using this militarization and force in everyday civilian life, which infuses civilian life, and these sites become markers and of occupation and hierarchies, and domestic violence increases because force is justified, and there are no structures to really complain. And you can see then the impact that these kind of conflicts have on women, the whole issue of dishonor and rape, and then there are these camps where there are these soldiers who are missing, these men who are missing, the whole story of half widows, which we saw, where there was no redress, but that they were clubbed as, they were shunned, and they had no recourse. So there is this kind of political violence. And if you see in areas where there is more armed conflict, there is also these women get disempowered, and these are areas which I have been to personally in Buxa in Assam, where houses were burnt and with between riots between communities and outsiders and insiders. And you saw what happened to women in camps. The men went off looking for jobs, but women were left looking after the children, becoming refugees, literally. So war impacts men and women very, very differently. There is a gendered impact. And again, during this Kargil war, you can see the statements which I got out from some of the, which shows, how this masculinity and the degradation of women and what motherhood means actually goes. So, of course, when this said, I have done my best to protect the honor of my motherland, but at the same time, some of the women said, had I been blessed by a son instead of a daughter, I would have sent him to fight. So the bias against women and, the skewed gender indices, you tend to don't want women, or you don't want to have the girl child. Whereas the reality was, with what one soldier said, that you cannot even eat the ice now or drink the water, which is laced with cordite. Even the streams down below are contaminated. So those issues of environment, climate, the military expenditure, all that is forgotten. But instead, you have, this son preference, etc. because you can see here what happens with these wars, where 2,000 pounds of waste is dumped each day, and there's serious pollution and, in these war fronts. Of course, women play these multiple roles, but again, you can see when women become refugees, what happens is that they are identified more because when, they're wearing, men merge into a crowd with what they wear. But women, it's very easy to identify them when they are the foreign press recently that Afghan women and, Britain is so large-heartedly, we've taken to 20,000 refugees, but only 5,000 this year. And then you have this anti-immigration because war leads to displacement, huge amounts of displacement. And you can see what this immigration and this displacement is leading to, such polarization in countries, and see how the male are portrayed from the global south as anti-refugee, anti-immigration posters. But of course, it also, wars and insecurity objectifies women. You can see that second day I see something. This is during COVID, the moment, because, the focus then is women's bodies, because wars play out on them, security plays out on it, inequality is there's inequality between genders. And this comes into corporate culture. There is a link between women, more violence wherever there are armed conflicts. There's studies after studies which show this, and it shows that, there's a WHO study which just a few years ago, which said that 80% of the women they had interviewed everywhere in the world had suffered domestic violence. So domestic violence does not, of course, it comes out of asymmetry of power, but it also comes out when the use of force is popularized and seen as a viable option during war. And this is the grim sex ratios, the sex decline of the woman child. So really, women need to talk of peace. We need to talk of intersectionality, which is crucial in understanding social dynamics, to connect the dots that war and conflict is not an isolated phenomena, it is very linked. And the last question, and of course, then there is women and peace and women and resistance, and how much they have gone on the streets for this equality. The whole women's movement has been mobilized. They rape as a violation of human rights. Argued for human security. We've seen all these demonstrations. These are some of the photographs I've taken in the various demonstrations I've been to. Break the silence on men's violence. It's a dress, not a yes. This is all linked to what I'm talking about. But the last thing I want to talk about is this whole thing about this big debate today linked to a feminist foreign policy. And that is a right, women have been struggling for their rights to have equal access, and therefore their right to join militaries, their right to join national security structures. And in that, there is a big division in the feminist movement. And this really is my last point, because I'm going to leave it with you all to think about it. That is whether women should have the right to join and should be encouraged to join as combatants in armies. So there are two views. The liberal feminists say yes, because they should have autonomy. They have to have autonomy of choice. They have to have the right. Whereas other feminists, especially in Mexico and many in the global south, they talk about the feminism of rupture, that we do not want to be included in this kind of system as feminist, as a system which is so unequal, which is going to militarize and co-opt us into militarist positions. So, bodies like the NATO, etc., are really talking about that, now women should be part of NATO, and women should, there's a lot of talk that our best national security combatants are people like Condoleezza Rice and others who, when they were asked questions like, the sanctions, with the sanctions, 40,000 babies in Iraq were killed, and they've had on record statements saying that, quite frankly, it was worth it. So, because this is part of our American national security. So there are these debates to decide which feminism we want to be part of. Whether we want the feminism of inclusion, of resource inclusion, or we want a feminism of which is linked to critical thinking and re-examining women's roles, but having the opportunity to also of power system and structures. So that's where I'll end. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for such an enlightening session and an interesting question to end the session on. Now I would like to invite Professor Vibhuti Patelji for her remarks.
Yeah. Professor Anuradha, you have brought in so many new issues, mainly about women joining the existing system of securitization and their role. But are there any examples which you can give which are worth evaluating? The women in power using their power for peace and justice. Can you?
Yes, I think there have been, especially just recently, for example, such an important example is of Nelly Pandor of South Africa. She was foreign minister in South Africa, and she was instrumental for South Africa going to the International Court of Justice against the genocide.
Correct.
So you can see how she used her position.
It's so powerful, no? The way she speaks also is so convincing.
Amazing that she was. And now she didn't win elections, but I was on a panel with her. And it would be wonderful if IMPRI would also, now she's open to coming for all these webinars. And there have been others. There was, in fact, even in Sweden, one of the women who advocated a feminist foreign policy, first they agreed, and then as soon as she said, don't send arms or cut down Sweden's military expenditure, she was sidelined. So women have done it, but they've also been women who have, like, let's say Hillary Clinton, who says, I'm always in the war room. When she was Secretary of State, she said, I'm in the war room whenever we wanted to bomb anyone. So there are these choices now that women who've had these roles have the opportunity to make. So it's a very individual choice, I think.
I think we need to amplify the voices of those who have really stood for the humanity and peace and justice.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Ma'am, there are few questions from the participants.
I saw there's one question which just it's a comment that militarization is a patriarchal institution that relies on violence. So there's no question as such. That I can see.
Ma'am, there's a question in the chat box. Some scholars argue that women in leadership reduce the likelihood of a country going to war, suggesting a link between women's leadership and peaceful outcomes. However, others believe this view risks being essentialist, implying women are inherently peaceful, which can come across as sexist. How can we address this issue in a balanced way that avoids gender stereotypes, but still recognizes the potential impact of women in leadership on peace and conflict? This is a question by Tarunika Roy.
this is an important question, but as I said, that you see, I think we need to have this balance where it's very important for women's rights and the women's movement to ask for equal opportunity, to be part of political systems, of power structures, of institutions, and not be denied that role because you're a woman or you need maternity leave, and feminism is ultimately an ideology. So on the one hand, you need women everywhere, but to be a feminist, it's a choice and the type of feminist. And if you're in that role, for me, I think at least that voice would come in, and this can come from both men and women, that we need to have also human security. We need to, if you're in a position of, let's say, in a position of deciding about conflict and war and security, we need to go for the option of negotiation, focus on civil society, focus on voices from below. So be true to what has brought you here. Ultimately, why are we as women being able to speak here? It's because we stand on the shoulders of the women's movement of the past, which includes the voices from the West and East, from the global South and from the North. So I'm not one which rejects other voices. I really believe that feminism is also democracy, but one must have the right to choose. So I, for one, would not like to be part of some neoliberal policy-making think tank, for example. I would rather be one in which, so that is a personal choice, and that's what I'm asking you to balance and question all this. So you don't even have to believe what I have said. You can question that and say this is rubbish, and as long as you have empirical evidence and argument to back you up. So I think that is how we need to address gender stereotypes wherever we are, and recognize, as you said, the potential impact of women in leadership in peace and conflict.
Thank you so much, ma'am. There's another question from Simran Napith ji. Given that women face unique security risks in conflict zones, what specific measures should international missions adopt to ensure their safety while empowering them to lead effectively in these volatile environments?
You see, there are laws which regulate conflict areas, international humanitarian laws, the Geneva Conventions, additional protocols 1 and 2, which India has not signed, but other countries have. There is an international law which says rape is a war crime. We need to implement these. We need to, peacekeepers, we need to sensitize our armies. And I think now a lot of armies in South Asia do get a course on gender sensitization. I myself have given such courses to UN peacekeepers repeatedly for years, where they have a course on gender sensitization. So in writing about it, talking about it, mobilizing for it is all extremely important. I think now there is a gender awareness, and I don't see the kind of cases that we used to see in the 1990s, whether it is about our own South Asian or armies, or about UN peacekeepers. So that is, it's a slow process, but the fact that all of us as women, as feminists, have written about it, talked about it, a lot of women have joined the army and resisted it, all this has helped. But I'm not saying that everything is fantastic either. There are a lot of challenges. There's a lot of research needs to be done, a lot of writing to be done. Really, And there's one other question on rising military expenditures and the impact. This rising military expenditures is really cuts into social expenditures. So we need to relate that. We need to say that if military expenditures are rising, then okay, raise our education budget, raise the health budget. It needs to be connected. Decrease health defense expenditures if necessary, but don't let it cut into our social budgets, into old women's pensions, into other things. So again, these are all social issues, and both men and women should be engaged in these conversations and putting pressure and raising issues on this and connecting these dots. A lot of time when there's an increase in defense budget, the link is to national security, but not to social expenditure. So it's up to us to bring out that these two are also connected. There's national security and there's social security. So please connect it, and there's human security. So do connect all this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. There are two more questions. The first one is from Riha Jensiji. Could you share your perspective on the roles and challenges faced by women participating in asymmetric warfare? Given the complex dynamics of these conflicts, how do you view the contributions and experiences of women within such environments, and what unique impacts do you believe their involvement has on the broader strategies and outcomes of these conflicts? There's another question.
Yeah, let me just answer this. It's very important because I want to bring your notice to an asymmetric conflict which is going on. We see it every day on our television. We see it on our phones. There is an asymmetric conflict in Palestine, Gaza, West Bank, Lebanon. And you know what is happening to women there, whether they are combatants or not. We don't know exactly, but even the UN, and you can see the amazing role that this Albanese, this UN human rights reporter in the UN has said, Albanese, please look it up. I can send it to you. I have her speech and a report in which she showed the impact of this conflict on women and children and how much international law has been violated. So women and children, number one, they're clubbed together to show that women have the same agency as women, as children. So, it's men who are, but nonetheless, even then, women are very badly and differently impacted because ultimately they have to bear the burden, the trauma of children to see this death. Not that men don't, they also do. So war and conflict in itself is bad. And I think as women, we must oppose it. An asymmetrical conflict, there's no end to the tragedy and its description. I mean, what can one say as one sees it every day? What's the second question?
Thank you so much, ma'am. The second question is from Bhanupriya Jaiswalji. How do digital platforms enable Indian women in the diaspora to influence global governance?
I think digital platform has been an opening. Of course, it's also dominated by some particular kinds of discourse, the rubbish in it. But if you can discern it, you can use it quite well. And you can use it to give good messages. You can use it for peace. You can use it for against violence. You can use it to comment on global governance because now everyone has a voice in this digital age. You have an argument you can present. And of course, it's all about how many followers, etc. But if you use it in a creative way, you can give your message on global issues through digital messaging. It is ultimately still a very open platform.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for answering the questions. I'll move on to the next session now. So I'm honored to call upon Professor Mariam Seedat-Khan, Certified Clinical Sociologist, at the Association for Applied and Clinical Sociology, AACS, and professor at University of KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa, who will address us on the topic of global migration and feminist foreign policy. Over to you, ma'am.
Good afternoon to everyone, or good morning. Thank you for having me. It's been a great learning experience so far. I think it would be remiss of me not to mention with the context of today's discussions, the devastation that I feel of the outcomes of the US elections and what it means for women. And I'm not sure how people are feeling, but the implications for me are, spiraling for women across the globe. So the global South is influenced significantly by the North, which probably explains my emotions in terms of diplomacy and gendered social, cultural, and economic rights are often placed on the back burner. So we as women across the globe, as a universal community, have to challenge these traditional patriarchal diplomacy, focusing on equity, justice, and inclusivity. Many of us thought that the US was ready for a woman president. So while feminist foreign policy has its roots in the global North, we cannot forget matriarchal societies that have a long sustained history in the South. So this imposition from the North has failed to align with the global South's realities. And this demands or mandates a localized global South approach. So in this process, we cannot negate this decolonial state. And this mandates an intersectional approach and requires incorporating indigenous knowledge systems, be they from Africa, India, Brazil, China. So if we look at BRICS countries advocate for cooperative cooperation to advance social justice, gender, push against the narrative of imperialism or post-colonial remnants that are so pervasive in our society. So this aim to redistribute economic power, break down or deconstruct inequalities are important and critical in marginalizing voices such as ours and our respondents, our communities, and our societies. So if we look at foreign policy, feminist foreign policy in, say, Sweden and Canada, there's a focus on promoting equality, human rights, and working with indigent communities. But if you look at the frameworks, they reflect contextual experience and priorities and are often frequently incompatible when we apply them to the global South. So, I want to say that fundamental rights in the global North are very different to fundamental rights in the global South. So to embark on a foundational analysis, we have to look at the ethical implication and the relevance for international relations, which we must consider if we are to consider a comparative framework for global South perspectives and experiences. It must be rooted in a decoloniality, recognizing historical legacies of colonialism, apartheid, the caste system, imperialism, and sustained structural inequalities. The shifting of power or the view of victims and recipients of aid to advancing women as active agents, as citizen scientists who have a role in determining peace building, diplomacy, security, be it food security, human security, environmental degradation, gender-based violence, to reconfigure economic structures and reduce conflict. So the integration of gendered global governments will serve well to reshape diplomatic priorities and impact policy agenda that prioritize the agency of women, which has historically been neglected. So if this is reimagined and considers all these systemic inequalities, we are able to theorize and practice without falling into a trap of conforming to global North perspectives. I cannot emphasize enough how this must be rooted in specific political and economic cultural context, because while BRICS countries are aligned, their historical subjugation and exploitation by the North tell different stories. This prevents the risk of homogenizing policies and maintains a response to social realities. So when we look at proposals from Global South feminists, we see the focus on peace building to redefine our own security. When we examine Western-centric IR theories, you see they marginalize non-Western voices, okay, which further subjugates and compromises feminist foreign policies in developing or global South countries. So how do we redefine security and power? Okay, we need to broaden our definitions and hear from the citizen scientists, the women themselves, where in the 21st century, gender-based violence is still a critical concern. Okay, so how does the context of the Global South reshape the conceptualization of foreign policy? It begins with the dismantling of power imbalances, which are systemic, and promoting transformative social change rather than just advocating for a change. So what are the challenges? I don't think any of us have those answers, but they are widespread, as are the opportunities in terms of global governance. One is challenging traditionally margined global governments. It lacks influence to advocate for transformative feminist foreign policy. If you look at our, you referred to our minister, our one-time minister, Naledi Pandor, her voice is heard, but her voice has also been silenced to some degree. So local norms clash with feminist principles, leading to domestic and international resistance, intensifying cultural and political resistance. So in the South, we face financial insecurity and institutional capacity that hinders policy implementation and advocacy. So on the other hand, opportunities are evident in redefining policies, but a promotion of solidarity amplifies a collective voice. So, how can this serve as a tool for redefining power dynamics and advancing a more inclusive global political order? So while we have policies and fundamental rights through CEDAW, through the United Nations, through Universal Declaration of Human Rights and gender advocacy campaigns, the work is there, the advancing in terms of education, in terms of healthcare. However, without a cooperation and inclusivity and prioritizing of human rights and human needs, free of race, free of gender, free of geography, and free of location, we cannot move forward. So how do we as the Global South reshape it? Dismantling historical justices. And, I want to add this in. I was in India in the month of September, and I had the privilege of working with amazing colleagues. And one of the things that is so systematized and so colonial in the way colleagues address each other, the very colonial title of sir and ma'am, if we look at the historical roots of where that comes from, it's rooted in British colonial linguistics and titles of oppression. So the challenges start at a engagement level to language level. It's expansive, and while we may consider these small, they redefine global power dynamics. It's how you viewed, how you spoken to, and the agency that you allowed within the context. So we have a very similar remnant in South Africa in a post-apartheid society, reference to sir and ma'am, but we have made significant shifts away from that. So I want to just quickly, and I know I have a time limit, so I'm just going to present a few case studies. If you look at Colombia's peace process, we see that women's contribution were included in final agreements. In Rwanda, a leader in gender parity with over 60% of women in parliament emphasized gender-responsive approaches to peacekeeping. In Mexico, we see they address intersectionality, racial discrimination, and indigenous rights and knowledge systems. So the practical application in the Global South requires adapting or socially constructing frameworks that align with local sociopolitical realities and leveraging diplomatic platforms to advance socially responsive or gender-responsive, socially just policies. We analyze how security discourses are socially constructed and gendered, which give us a critical lens. So these case studies, while minimal, demonstrate how we can operationalize equality in the Global South. So in Colombia, we see peace agreements which intensify the inclusion of gender subcommission. The agreement looks at gender-based violence, sexual violence, food insecurity among farmers, and political participation. So Rwanda's commitment to gender parity in its governance, where we see 60% of the women and the country's mission actively promote gender advocacy. So, if we look at South Africa's leadership, we see we have emphasized gendered peace, security, advocating for inclusion, our diplomatic efforts, whether it's to, the International Court of Justice, we have played a central role in gender justice and advancing the right of women, okay? So let's look a minute at India. So while India has not explicitly adopted a framework, gender-responsive approaches internationally have offered evidence of their initiatives. India's role in post-conflict Afghanistan saw a focus on gender equality, empowerment, and capacity building for Afghan women. India has been one of Afghanistan's largest donors in the last few years with billions of dollars. So a significant portion has focused on advancing women, education, civil society. So if we look briefly at BRICS initiatives, we see we see opportunities for collaboration, but we also see limitations in terms of funding and building or facilitating dialogues such as these that are as inclusive. There are entrepreneurs that support food insecurity, rural farming. Startup initiatives in India include gender focus, ecosystem, healthcare. So what is our role as academics of BRICS Nation in terms of collaboration? I mean, precisely initiatives such as this one, scholarship, exchange programs, digital literacy, training women in technology and advancing them, or building a legacy for the next generation that comes after us to continue the fight, developing cooperation, particularly with women who are disproportionately affected. So there was a question, and women in leadership and political empowerment, we have seen representation in BRICS countries, increasing participation and decision-making. We have seen gender-based violence initiative, gender responses to policies and climate change. We see evidence of this, yet we still turn on the news and hear about gang rapes and murder and women still dying at the hands of oppressors or perpetrators. So social protection and welfare program. So BRICS has been front and center in enhancing maternity benefits, pensions, unemployment, with a youth gender focus, because women in the global south continue to be the poorest of the poor, occupying the lowest rungs of employment, and they are stuck in a cycle because of the lack of access to affordable and accessible childcare. So we have fractured families because children are left behind with surrogate caregivers while women migrate to find work to support their families. So what are the key roles? Women must be front and center in leading this process. And there must be a buy-in from ministries to commit to gender responsive budgeting. And without placing women in these ministerial roles or in central positions, we are going to see change at a snail's pace. So political, academic, institutional alliances, improve financial and institutional capacities, which is one of the biggest challenges that we face in terms of gender responses. So the gender south, we face pressure to conform to dominant norms, but we do not have the resources or the support to conform to global north dictates. So we in the global south, what we have is a cooperation that creates opportunities for best practice and ethical standards to broaden security, to reshape international relations by prioritizing gender justice, human security, and decoloniality. So I think engaging in diplomacy through feminist foreign policy provides a tool for decolonizing our international relations. And in this context, feminist foreign policy emerges as a critical instrument for advancing gender justice. So I think I'm going to stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for such an inspiring and enlightening session. Your discussion on redefining power dynamics prioritizing human security and challenging patriarchal diplomacy provided a fresh perspective on creating more inclusive and equitable global governance, especially from the Global South's point of view. So with this, I would like to invite our chair, Professor Patel, for her remarks.
Providing a very fresh perspective from the point of view of African nations, and also giving so many important examples of best practices. I would like to know that in feminist foreign policy, how should we deal with the question of debt, which most of the global south, the southern countries are facing, because they are continuously blackmailed by World Bank and IMF and extremely cruel and barbaric stabilization policies are imposed for using the argument of debt. No, so what should be our approach to debt?
So, Prof, I wish I had the answer, and it was simple, but that is my interpretation. That is the North wielding power over the South. And if you look at initiatives, whether it is funding coming from the United Nations or one of your big foundations in the North, the USA, the Ford Foundation, Mott Foundation, or any one of the foundations in the global North, there are terms and conditions. Okay, so what is the objective? How do we, as a collective, develop these programs to clearly support our initiatives in collaboration with fundamental and universal rights? And I think we don't use our social capital and existing policy enough to claim our right to development, to claim our right to education, to claim our right to special needs, to claim our right to vaccinations, to claim our right to healthcare, hospitals, access to healthcare, access to medication. So, and this requires us to have a paradigm shift where we don't look at things through a rose-tinted lenses. And, in the introduction, they said, political scientists, welcome to political scientists. And here I'm a clinical sociologist, and the relevance of multidisciplinary international collaboration is so undermined. I speak to women in the academy, whether it is in Turkey, the United States, Norway, Japan, or South Africa. The gendered challenges that women face are the same. The advances that we think we have made has been disrupted by COVID. So we seek funding for initiatives to advance gender advocacy, inclusion, civil society. It doesn't matter what aspect, but we're working towards addressing a social problem and finding a solution. But we require the resources from these funders. So I think I don't have the answer, but my approach has always been in any form of intervention or funding or project was to claim my right or claim the right based, when you have scientific evidence or you have legally binding mandates, whether it's a resolution from the UN, you are better placed to determine the terms and conditions. But the historical debt, I'm a view of the historical debt is something that needs to be forgiven, considering the benefits that colonizers have gained from exploiting for centuries, exploiting countries like India, countries like South Africa. Brazil, So I hope that helps, but I think that's like one of those philosophical questions, Prof, that, we're always searching for an answer.
Can we translate it into action agenda? Is it possible?
Absolutely. Look what South Africa did with the International Court of Justice, right?
Yeah.
So at the risk of alienation.
China also, I think, China also waived debt, no, of several African countries. So that example is there for us, yeah.
So, but even with that, there are long-term financial gains for these countries that forgive debts, right? So these terms and conditions are not completely removed. Within a capitalist economy, it's still a survival of the fittest, and it's just about the pursuit for profit.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Now I would like to open the floor for Q&A session. I request the participants to raise their hands or to write the questions in the Q&A box. I would like to invite Debjani Chaudhary ji to ask the question.
You can unmute, Debjani ji. Hello, you can unmute and speak. Shobna ji, are you ready to speak? Hello.
I think the host.
Yeah. Please go ahead, Debjani.
Good evening, everybody. Myself, Debjani Chaudhary. And it's been wonderful listening to you, ma'am. And both the speakers have been very good. Your presentation here and admitting that there is no clear-cut, solution as such existing, and how to go about with the solution is not very clear. And we are not going ahead with, certain basic things which we really need to ask for, like you said about the vaccinations and various other programs which we really need to go for. We are not looking at all those aspects. We are all deviated away. Now, how do you feel? Like, do you think like these are the cultural differences that we have across different countries, and the way women are, brought up in a certain way, do all these influence our decision-making capacities, given all these different, variety of cultures, traditions, and everything that we come from? Are these in any way, making us decide the way we are deciding things, or going ahead with it, or not going ahead with it? Being in power, some take, very positive decisions, some do take negative ones. Why is it that we women ourselves are not in a position to, be very constructive and help out much more than what is actually being done at present?
Thank you for that question. So, and here's my differentiation as a sociologist in terms. So the universal challenges that women face are universal, irrespective of language, culture. So it's childcare, it's career trajectories, it's exclusion, it's gender-based violence, it's food insecurity, land insecurity, inheritance. Women are still the poorest of the poor. There's still, I can speak for my field, there's still more male professors than there are female professors. There were more women that saw the impact of COVID-19 because of loss of breadwinners. So how does it influence our decisions? So it depends on the context of our decision, right? Whether we are sitting in a position where we have to hire people or employ people. And are we sensitizing ourselves to a gender equitable team? Are we in forums where we experience or we witness unfair treatment of other women, whether it is in a political form or in a professional setting or it's within the media, how have we come to the defense? How have our actions on a daily basis influenced decisions? So we can start at a familiar level in terms of how we socialize our children. I'm the mother of 2 sons who can cook better than me, clean better than me, and their socialization was very intentional. They understand concept. Yeah. So they understand concept.
I think we really need to, I mean, this is wonderful take from here that we have. We really need to raise our boys better. Our boys really need to be raised better also. Maybe that is a take from you, ma'am. Like you were saying here, like in Rwanda, you were talking about 60% women participation in parliament. In India also, we have 33% here. But ultimately, the women really do not have a voice. I mean, how many are actually being heard? That is, in our country, things are so different. I'm sure you will see that women are there in the parliament, but they're just sitting and not major decision makers in any way. I mean, are their voices really being heard? This is something.
Yes, definitely. So we have among women, and we have this in any environment, you have what are called bootlickers, who are those women that will support systemic patriarchy, and they will maintain the status quo. So, and I'm not saying it's true for India, but they will get into positions of power. And another sociological term we use is queen bee. They become the queen bees. So they've made it to the top of the pile, and they don't want any other woman to kind of threaten their space. So these bootlickers and these queen bees, they in these very important or senior executive roles, but they've climbed over the top and they've trampled over every one of us. And they're going to stay up there, and they're not going to compromise their position, and they become implicit. Like in a university institution, you have something called the All Boys Network, right? So in order to sustain this, you have to have you have to build a team that's going to support this thing to ensure that women still have high administrative roles, so it excludes them from advancing, or it becomes more complex for women to access these rights or be successful and shift out of this poor of the poor, poorest of the poor.
Ultimately, another power struggle and survival of the fitter. All right. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Ma'am, may I ask a question?
Yes.
Ma'am, may I ask a question? Can I go on?
Yeah,
Yes,
go ahead.
sure.
Yeah, okay. Ma'am, I'm Shobhana Karthikeyan from Madras Christian College, ma'am. I have one request for the PowerPoint, because the text was a little small and reading was a little difficult. So if you could share, it will be extremely beneficial. That's one. And second one, also we popularly know, and also you had mentioned that whenever there is a disaster, be it human-made or anything, the women and the children are hit the most. So when a society is building itself up in such a situation, what are the extra hurdles that the women have to go through? Definitely, that's also going to be more as compared to men. So what are the extra steps that women have to take in general? It's a generic answer that I want to know.
Okay, so at an economic level, right? If you have a group, if we know, we have scientific evidence, empirical evidence, we know that women are the poorest of the poor. So we know that women continue to earn less than men. So when you are in that financially precarious position, you don't have disposable cash that secures your future, be it insurance or funds for higher education or skills training for your children. Then you have cultural practices which are so pervasive. in terms of inheritance laws, in terms of that are very patriarchal, or in terms of death of a spouse or death of a husband. Let's be specific about it. When you are part of the poorest of the poor, you live in compromised geographic regions in a country, in a state, and you are at high risk of natural disasters, of crime, of sexual abuse, rape, and so on and so forth. So what can we do to secure this? We can balance the scales, invest in the girl child, invest in reconstruction and develop housing, support for women through childcare, maternity benefits. There's still far too many women that have no social security and give birth, and 24 hours later are back to work because they have no other choice. Subject to public health care, which is vastly neglected in the global south because of corruption and failure to deliver, a culture of non-delivery. And of course, race, gender, class intersections are so entrenched in everything that is done, and how people are treated based on who they are and the alphabets behind their names or how they look. So it's a very complex question. You know, when you look at any natural disaster, whether it is the floods in Florida or hurricane in floods in Zimbabwe, you will see that women are confined to aid camps for years and years. We've just finished a PhD with a candidate where flood victims were in a camp for over 2 years, and the challenges that they face are gender-based violence, rape, crime, and you know, there's definitely a disconnect. So we have to, you know, one of the ways to begin for this, how we hit the hardest. And for me, a conversation I had with both my sons at the age of 10, and I often did it when I was driving them to a school event, asking them, do you know what rape is? And they would say to me, Mom, how is it that we are the only boys? How is it you are the only mother that has a conversation about what rape is? I said, because if I don't educate you on what rape is, how are you expected to know? So if we don't open these discussions and we don't socialize and set the examples for our children, our students, our nieces, our nephews, our communities, how do we expect our boys to deliver differently if we have not been complicit? So women will always be the hardest hit because we're afraid to have these open conversations. It makes us uncomfortable.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
I request Sai Rache
Yes.
to.
Thank you. My name is Sai, and I work with the Asian Pacific Resource and Research Center for Women. It's a regional women's organization. And so my question is more in terms of looking at the multilateral system. We have the United Nations and different resolutions coming out of the UN system, Security Resolution, you have 1325, and most recently we have the Pact for the Future, which has actually a whole chapter on how to advance peace. Now, but we all know on the ground this is not working, and you know, it's It's just there are so many power dynamics within the system, especially the Security Council, which is so power driven, and there's lack of space for anybody in the for the global South countries and many other countries. So my question to both the professors is, what kind of reform do you actually want to propose? Because we have reforms, everything is worded very, very well, but what do you think should happen with the UN system that can really advance peace and security?
I don't know if Prof wants to go first.
Anuradha, Professor Anuradha. She's not there. You can go.
Okay, so for me, yes, thank you for your question, Sai. It's like theory and practice. The laws are there, but how do we operationalize that? We can have all these great policies and these laws, but if they're not operationalized? So we have to, fundamentally, we have to look at two things. We have to look at education, prioritizing the girl child. I did my PhD many decades ago, but one of the things I looked at was domestic workers and the socialization of the girl child into the role of domestic worker. And every one of them I heard, why are you domestic work? Oh, because, the investment is in the boy child for education, because the belief that the girl child is married off into a family and will enrich the family of, my husband died, or I didn't get married. And these were the things. So if we fail to prioritize education, we are going to, we're going to not see any changes. Then the next step is skills and salaries. Okay. If you look at simple professions, a woman that is an expert, culinary expert, she's referred to as a cook. A man with the same skill is considered a chef, right? If we look at a woman that is working in a house, she's considered a maid or a domestic worker. If there is a male worker in the house doing the same thing, he's considered, the title given to him is a butler. So even in our linguistic composition of how we define careers. So during times of economic crisis with high unemployment, who suffers? Women are relegated from the bottom rungs and men enter these roles. And when employment becomes more widely available, we see economic growth, men advance to higher positions with higher salaries, and women then reoccupy these roles. So unless we see a fundamental shift in educating and skilling women, prioritizing their education, access to sanitary towels, access to basic things that allow them to stay in school, we are in trouble.
All right, thank you, ma'am. I request Janki Andharia ji to ask her question. Janki ji? Parvez Babul ji? Abhishu Karki ji, you can go on with your question. So, ma'am, the question by Janki Andharia ji is, when we expect changes with women holding positions in various ministries, etc., are we essentializing women? Women often continue with status quo as bearers of patriarchy. They struggle to find a place to survive in a man's world creates its own challenges.
That we don't want bean peas and bootlicker.
100%. Yeah. Yeah, in response to that, I think we have to be the change that we want to see. So, and it can be a very isolating experience when you stand up against the system, because people are fearful. They're fearful of losing their jobs. They're fearful of being victimized. So generally, when we put in that position, we have two responses. We fight or we flight. And the way the systems are created, this systemic patriarchal structures are built so to kind of put you in a position, even when you fight, there's implications for women on their mental health, their career trajectory. It's so complex. It's the implications to kind of see this through is difficult. So often women will flight, or the new concept of quiet quitting. They will be complacent and they will dull their voices, downplay realign their ambitions or their goals, whether it is in an academic setting or in a corporate setting. It remains very much the same. So it's about having the courage of our convictions and standing up for what is right. And these are our fundamental rights. And it's difficult to challenge it because, like I said, it's an isolating journey.
Thank you, ma'am. A question from Parvez Babulji is, how can we make more platforms for women to let them talk and let them be heard?
I think we don't listen enough. I think when somebody asks a question or when somebody is talking to us, we immediately are thinking of the response that we're going to give. And it's something we've got to learn to listen. I'm a huge advocate of the citizen science approach. And what the citizen science approach is an approach where when you identify a problem, you listen to those that are affected and you listen to their solutions for the problem. Because there's nothing more significant than those affected, whether it's unemployment, whether it's food insecurity or gender-based violence. There's nothing more valuable than hearing from those affected by it in terms of how to provide a solution, or how could this be mitigated? What could we have done differently?
Thank you so much, ma'am. Abhishu Karkiji, do you want to go on with your question?
Sure, can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that amazing presentation. It was very, very insightful. My question is more so related to the topic of migration when we look at it, because we talked a lot about representation of women, where they are and how they are. But when migration comes in play, just an observation on my side is that puts a lot of gap between representation of those women. So how would you kind of go about answering the question of the approach of representing these women, whether in the country of residence or their country of origin?
Okay, thank you for that question. So in 2016, I wrote an article with a PhD student of mine looking at Indian migrants in South Africa. And so representation, and I looked at new Indian migrants, not migrants that had arrived in the 1860s in terms of indentured labor. And the problem with representation, whether it be in terms of origin or place of residence, is particularly in the global South, is problematic because of xenophobia. And the study particularly on Indian migrants in South Africa, in Durban, where I live, was complex because you saw post-apartheid, you saw an influx of skilled Indians arriving in South Africa, establishing businesses in the technology sector, in the beauty sector, hair sector, clothing industry, so they began, we saw a whole level of new entrepreneurs that had captured the market very successfully. And when the excitement of the democracy had ended and reality began setting in, we saw high levels of unemployment, we saw failure to deliver on public housing, we saw the establishment of the Gender Commission, but we still saw there were still too many fractures. And as a result of that, there was dissatisfaction, there was civil kind of unrest, and we saw our targets were our foreign nationals, whether they were from Zimbabwe, Nigeria, India. We saw these people targeted. So in terms of representation, it becomes very precarious because I had such a great difficulty getting access to respondents to interview. It was really difficult. People were afraid, even though you guarantee them use of pseudonyms, confidentiality, they prefer to remain under the radar. You can go on online and look at xenophobia, whether it's in South Africa or India. You will see cases of xenophobia which almost silences people into this fight or flight mode. However, there are initiatives. There are many initiatives with youth migrants in terms of cementing their identity. We work within schooling system, within the schooling system, within the technology sector. We worked on projects with migrants, of children from the healthcare sector. So I don't have the answers. And I think initiatives such as these are about looking for the answers. But, people have lost their lives in terms of being vocal as migrants. And it's created an overwhelming fear, So I think, I hope that gives you some understanding of what's happening in South Africa.
Thank you, ma'am. I would now request Afshin Fatima ji to ask a question.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. My question is there any concrete measure that UN can actually take against countries who fail to uphold human rights, such as sanctions or any other measure? Because I haven't come across any of it. Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Afshin. We have so many human rights violations every single day. And people of color are more impacted by these, and they escape mainstream media. We saw more on the war in Ukraine than we ever see on any other conflict in Africa, Middle East, India, Kashmir, any other part of the world. So being signatories to these policies, laws, or declarations does not it does not guarantee any form of protection. I mean, I can give you hundreds of examples, but reinforcing it or holding countries accountable is a complex legal battle.
Thank you so much, ma'am. There's one last question from Munna Khayal Khattakji. Do you want to ask your question, Munnaji?
Hello, am I audible?
Yes.
I'm really enlightened by the presentations, and I'm really thankful for these informative presentations that both of you ladies have given here. I would like to ask that when we talk about women in parliament, it's usually said that women in parliament do not concern themselves with women issues. But the women in parliament, at least in South Asia, although they are in power, they are powerless. They are mostly nominated on reserved seats or gender quotas, and they rely on a male-dominated political party. How can these women in power be empowered unless there are structural changes brought in these political parties or in the electoral processes of these countries?
Where are you from, Munaj? Hello?
Ma'am, I belong to Pakistan.
Are you with any women's organization?
Yes, ma'am, I am.
That's nice. Okay, go ahead, Professor Mariam.
Thank you, Munna, for your question. You know, I disagree. So each political party has constitutions, each country has laws, and you know, you have to be the lone voice. I can give you many examples of politicians or members of parliament in South Africa alone that have been instrumental in as change agents. You know, in India, but if we buy in or we're not prepared to be that lone voice, then we have a problem. Then we are in a flight mode, and that's very dangerous for women to be in those positions and be in flight mode. Women that take up those positions have to be in fight mode and be prepared for the journey. And when you have an army of women behind you, it makes it that much easier. So building a network of women to help you achieve those goals is so critical. So, and that in itself is problematic. Finding those women that, you know, lift as they rise or have are not disingenuous at all, but a commitment to advancing and establishing, you know, a journey, a better future. So, you know, my analogy is I come from a family, my grand aunt, Professor Fatima Mir, was a human rights activist and a sociologist. And I sit at her desk, I sit in her office at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, a one-time white-only university called the University of Natal. She was the first person of color to be employed in that university. And her lectures were monitored by security police. And she was exceptionally vocal. And I sit in my office and, you know, obviously as a sociologist, she had a huge impact on my career choices, but her struggles are very similar to the struggles we face today. But she was a lone voice in a crowd that was not only disadvantaged her racially, but, you know, as gender, race, class, a complexity of things. So you know, as women, I think we get up every day and we are slaying dragons and we're resisting that poison apple. And I know it sounds very like fairy tale kind of stuff, but this is the reality. These dragons are in front of us every day. And, you know, the poison apple is not compromising our ethical values and our commitment to the cause. And you know, we see an increasing number of women that are able to do it, but the complexity of maintaining that is difficult.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for answering all the questions. Next, I would like to invite the last speaker for today, Dr. Manisha Madhava, Professor and Head at Department of Political Science, SNDT Women's University, Mumbai, for her address on engendering national security and international relations. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Fiza. Thank you, Vibhuti ma'am, for inviting me. I will start making my presentation. Just let me know if you can see. Are you able to see?
Yes, it's in the working mode. You have to make it fine. We can.
So it was an enlightening experience to listen to two very eminent scholars, you know, talking about a range of issues which are not necessarily related to, you know, foreign policy as such, but extremely enlightening because somewhere the whole idea of intersectionality comes into play. And we realize how you know, women's role in security, in diplomacy, in international politics is all embedded in the larger social structures, which is, as both the speakers mentioned, highly asymmetrical in nature. I propose to take a little more structured view and drawing from my understanding of international relations. And I talk about how, you know, how we can engender national security and how this entire discourse on engendering national security has been shaped as an alternative to the traditional security approach. And I also then go on to look at a case study with specific reference to India, where I will raise certain very important questions that we will have to sort of address when we talk about engendering security as such. So let me begin with the basics, and I think all of you will be familiar with it, but nevertheless, it needs to be said. So I will say that national security is very complex and a very multifaceted concept. And in broadly speaking, in most simple terms, probably, it would involve protection and preservation of the people of a nation, the sovereignty of the nation, and the vital interests of the nation against any kind of threats. Now, broadly, these threats can be of two types, and I will take a minute here, external and internal. External, as all of us would know, war or any kind of external aggression, and internal would mean, you know, civic strife and domestic terrorism, organized crime, natural disaster, climate change, displacement, etc., etc. But the overarching goal of national security is to maintain safety, stability, and well-being of the country, and governments employ a wide range of measures to achieve national security as such. However, what is important is that this kind of clear demarcation between internal and external security is increasingly being challenged in a globalized world. Now, the traditional, the military security approach, you know, focused largely on you know, use of power, structural violence to protect the nation from external threats. And they're basically state-centric in its nature. And remember, when I say state-centric, it also means that women's voices are often marginalized in the larger context of state. Not only that, the traditional military approach is is violent in its nature because it focuses on use of, strategizing the use of defense, building military capabilities, responding, creating infrastructure that will ensure military preparedness from potential aggressors. And it is often guided by doctrines that dictate the use of force, that dictate, spending the nation's resources. And in the case of Global South, these are very precious resources on procurement of both technology and weaponry. This obviously would mean that the resources that are available for other activities become very, very scarce. Now, the sister to this traditional militaristic approach is the diplomatic approach, and diplomatic approach too is militaristic in the sense that it emphasizes on use of dialogues, international relations to foster peace. It focuses on negotiations and treaties, and sometimes in cooperation, but it is also rooted in the constant use of threat of use of violence. And therefore, though there are these noises that are being made to mitigate tension, both these approaches are actually rooted in what would one say state-centric, violent approaches. However, and it focuses on the use and upkeep of a very strong, technologically enabled, gargantuan, if I could say, military establishment that is structured along lines which are very masculine in their nature, which rely on the use of violence, as I have said. But one must also keep in mind that of late, or not in more recent history, I would say that there is another dimension to military that has emerged, and that is the peacekeeping dimension to the forces, the humanitarian dimension to use of the forces, their use in disaster relief, their use in peace building, etc. So therefore, we see sort of a conflict between the traditional militaristic approaches, which are violent in their nature, and increasingly humanitarian activities that the armed forces are increasingly called upon to perform. And therefore, over a period of time, we have seen that there has been an expansion in the concept of security, which extends beyond, beyond military lens and encompasses human rights, health, education, social welfare, and of course, economic well-being, because that is extremely important to the security of the nation as such. So we see a gradual movement from a very militaristic, state-centric approach to a more human rights security approach, which encompasses a whole range of activities which are essentially related to collectives rather than to individuals as such, and deal with threats which are not necessarily external, but which are born out of inequities in the society. That could be poverty, that could be caste or religion, that could be disease, or that could be inequality. And in more recent times, we've recognized that the pandemic has raised biosecurity threats also. And there is a focus towards developing health infrastructure, the vaccine diplomacy that we are all familiar with, developing, responding to public health crisis as if it was almost like a violent activity. And international collaborations have become crucial for addressing these kinds of global issues. But the important question is that what does this kind of the traditional militarization mean in the context of gender? And how is the feminist approach, which emerged in the 1980s and 1990s, different from this largely state-centric framework as such? Now, scholars like Cynthia and Lowe and Tickner, for instance, they advocated for or they critiqued the biases that were embedded in these traditional militaristic approach, and criticized it for the fact that they did not take into account the voices of women and the experiences of women, especially those who were who were the victims of war or displacement or inequality or trolling in more recent times. So very clearly, the traditional national security approach does not seem to be working as far as our post-globalization world is concerned. And therefore, there is feminism in that sense provides a very critical alternative to this framework. As has been repeatedly said, that in situations of conflict, women are victims of rape, sexual violence, or sexual slavery, of assault, of displacement. This has been for long an area of concern because women not just suffer, but women are also weaponized. Women's bodies are also weaponized because sexual or wartime violence is not just a byproduct of conflict, but it is a deliberate weapon of war. And it is used to terrorize communities. It is used to destroy social cohesion. It is used to establish hegemony, and it is used to create a facade of legitimacy as such. So. In other words, violence against women in conflict situation is rooted in power imbalances. It's not just a byproduct of conflict, and it only worsens during the time of conflict. Because these power imbalances are being renegotiated in the time of violence. So feminist security framework, therefore, says, addresses this issue of violence against women, sexual or otherwise, as humanitarian issues, and calls for addressing these issues largely not merely as humanitarian concerns, but also as attempts at peace building and attempts at creating stability. In that sense, the feminist approach brings in the issues of social justice. It brings in issues of equality. It brings in issues of inclusivity onto the table. So while there is this entire gender mainstreaming that is happening at the other level, there is also a critical military study group that emerges within the domain of international relations that calls for that calls for not just gender mainstreaming, but an alternative understanding of how women can contribute to national security and how women can reimagine what is national security. National security cannot be defined merely as territorial integrity of the nation as such. There is far more to national security that is at stake, and women's lived experiences contributes to this understanding in a far richer way than others would. And beyond the national context, of course, there is also a global context to it, because environmental degradation or cybersecurity threats or displacements, they disproportionately impact not just women, but women of global south, who have bear the burden of caregiving, who bear the burden of securing food and water, who are displaced, and there is this intimate connection between climate change, environmental degradation, and the conflict that emerge out of it. Most conflicts today emerge not really out of war, but because of conflict over resources, conflict over inequalities, conflict over inequitable distribution of power in the society, and reproduction of the existing power imbalances that exist in the society. So in that sense, feminists provide an alternative approach insofar as they, they focus on developing a more human-centric intersectional approach that links security to social justice, that links security to public policies as such. And these public policies could be both internal as well as external. Of course, there is also the issue of decolonization, which feminist frameworks incorporate, because feminist scholars argue that national securities often reinforce neocolonial power structures that marginalize colonized voices of colonized people, and it also doubly marginalizes the voices of women of colonized nations. And therefore, central to the feminist understanding of national security is the need to prioritize human security over state security, highlighting the importance of importance of peace building, highlighting the importance of addressing the root causes of conflict, particularly resource scarcity, economic deprivation, poverty, diseases, which come in a significant way, and women are victims of diseases far more than others. And in addition to that, they also call for promoting proactive measures which go beyond merely diplomacy and focuses on inclusive policies and inclusive peace processes to prevent conflict and to build lasting peace. So in other words, the feminist approach shifts the focus from defense of the state to the security of the individual. Especially the security of marginalized individuals. And in that sense, takes a more holistic view of security. The other very important thing that we need to take note of is that there is an increasing challenge to what is referred to as militarized masculinities. Feminist perspectives challenge this masculine violence-based approach to advocate for more non-violent strategies of conflict resolution, like, for instance, reallocation of resources, from military spending to more social sector spending, and they also challenge this whole culture of creating a society where masculinity is revered in that sense. And we were listening to Professor Anuradha Chenoy, in which she talks about how these power structures or what happens within the forces has cascading effect on what happens in our homes and in our lives, where we don't want girl children, or we justify violence within homes. This is very central to the whole feminist argument as such. And most importantly, the feminist framework, calls for a broader movement. It calls for coming together of various different groups, whether it is those who advocate decolonization, or rights of the LGBTQ, or rights of or those who oppose disparity. In that sense, the intersectionality is very key to the feminist understanding of national security. In that sense, the feminist approach not only has provided an alternative lens, but it has also, brought to fore the rationale for using a feminist approach. If we observe that closely and we read between the lines, the feminist approach underlines and underscores the fact that military functioning can be legitimized only if it is built on peace building exercises, on providing social security and execution of individual welfare in collective scenarios and collective well-being as such. Of course, there have been many efforts to engender national security, and many of you may have heard of this many times, so I will only briefly touch upon this. But one of the most significant steps in this was the UN Resolution 1325 on Women, Peace and Security, which was adopted on 31st October 2000. The resolution is important because it represents a shift in the way in which international community understood and responded to conflict, and it emphasized on, or it underscored the vulnerabilities that women face in conflict situation, and acknowledged that women's voices are often excluded in shaping the post-conflict peace processes. It is only by ensuring women's participation in post-conflict peace negotiations, post-war rebuilding, that we can build a more inclusive, sustainable, and lasting peace. In many conflict zones, the resolution's advocacy for women's participation in peace talk led to significant advances. For instance, we know in Liberia, in Nepal in 2006, in Colombia, where women have been given seats on the negotiation table, and this has led to a more comprehensive peace agreement that has addressed the needs and concerns of not just women but also the entire society as such. Another very important thing of Resolution 1325 does is that it also called for national action plans and to implement the provisions of 1325 at the national level. So these plans guided the states in formulating policies and strategies that would promote women's participation, especially in conflict zones. Now, although the UN effort has been significant, and since then we have seen more women in peacekeeping forces, we have seen more gendered units in defense and security forces, we have seen all women peace unit, for instance, Indian female peace unit in Liberia was one of the first all women peace unit, and it was very helpful in because of the work of this peacekeeping forces. Many more cases of sexual violence were actually reported, and it also led to better intercommunity relationship in Liberia as such. Similarly, the gendered units have been established, especially in Swedish armed forces, which a gender advisor was appointed. In Afghanistan, we saw that the gender units played a very important role in negotiating the post-conflict negotiations as such. Also, the UN, has also looked into global acceleration unit, as and the global acceleration unit is actually brings in multiple partners who would pool in resources that would support peace building effort after the war, after the conflict as such. These trust funds have done remarkable work in rehabilitating women these are grassroots organizations, and these grassroots organizations have really played a very important role in engendering the entire peace process. And over 80 countries, including Liberia, Afghanistan, Philippines, have created national action plans aimed at including women in security planning as such. And UK became the first country to fully integrate the principles of 1325 into its national policies, and the UK National Action Plan was adopted in 2010 and subsequently has been constantly evolved. Of course, gender-sensitive disaster management have gained traction of late, acknowledging very much the fact that women are disproportionately affected by national disasters, and several international organizations have adopted this approach in rescue and relief related work, whether it was in the time of tsunami or or in the time of various other and have significantly helped in reducing the mortality rates. There are there are several challenges to engendering national security, and one of them being that women are inadequately represented, whether it is in the leadership position or whether it is in the armed forces itself. This is one of the most important challenges that engendering national security faces. Partly as a result of what I have mentioned earlier, the militarized masculinities within the security system. Which refers to the way in which military institutions, broader security apparatus is infused with the notion of male dominance, aggression, of control, of sidelining traits which are associated with women, whether it is of empathy or whether it is of cooperation or negotiation. One must remember in this context that historically the whole idea of military has been structured around the way in which men have conceptualized security in terms of defense and strength and in terms of dominance, and these deeply ingrained cultural values and institutional norms reinforce the idea of security as primarily protection of the state itself. But having said that, I would now, these could be some of, on your screen, you see various steps that could be taken to engender the national security, and some of them have already been implemented, some are in the process of being implemented, and there have been legal frameworks that have been created to deal with gender-based violence, to support the survivors, etc. But I want to take you to this notion which has been very prevalent, which women's feminists have always brought to fore, that women are vastly underrepresented in leadership positions within security institutions, and that's largely because gendered socialization and entrenched norms prevent women from entering into the defense career. And even when women do enter into these positions, they are challenged by male colleagues who are often not very, they resist, or there is active resistance, or there is complete tacit lack of support. In that sense, I would quickly run you through the case of India, where women were originally only in they were nurses in the military, or they were doctors in the military, and from there women were allowed only in education or medical branches of the military, to now where women are inducted in all three ranks of the military, of the forces as such, and women officers are now part of the IAF, the peace building force. They can rise up the ladder. Even within the traditional branches, medicine and education, they can reach up to the rankings are higher. But what the crux of the matter here being that though we made this journey, and which is a very significant journey, and you can see some of the pictures here of women on board all-women crew in Northern Arabian Sea, women pilots, in transport and helicopters, women in Siachen Glacier, women as commanding officers, and women, there are a couple of things that the Indian experience brings to light. Number one, we see that in India, women are more in the paramilitary forces than in the armed forces as such. And interesting to note that paramilitary force largely deal with internal security issues. And more often than not, it has been seen that women are often used to create trust within the community. In that sense, are we looking at a situation where the armed forces, which is largely masculine in its nature, and only about 13% still are women within the forces, are they using women in order to legitimize their own positions in conflict zones as such? Now, this is a very important lesson that we see happening in the Indian context, and it has been seen that in almost all internal conflict zone, women have been brought to the forefront by the forces also, and generally women's work have been appreciated because they are able to build bridges with the communities. So largely, which are the military, which largely looks upon security as a violence-based issue, uses women's soft powers to negotiate with the community as such. Now, this is a very important development that has happened. The second thing that we need to ponder is when women enter the security forces, what does it mean for women? Are we looking at women becoming more militarized in that sense? Because based on our own research, which my co-writer who's done a PhD work on this, found that women begin to speak the language of violence once they are into the forces. And therefore, the entire training process in the forces itself, the entire process of indoctrination is largely masculine in its nature and focuses on violence, focuses on power structures, focuses on hierarchy, focuses on issues which are not quote unquote considered as feminine in that sense of the term. What is the next course of action for the feminist? I mean, we wanted women to enter into negotiating tables in armed forces, in parliaments, in leadership positions. We've made some progress in it. But what is happening to women who become a part of these forces? That is one part of the story. And the other part of the story is what is happening to the force itself. Is the force changing because of the, is it engendering the security forces as such? Or are women becoming simply the agents of militarization, and therefore unable to bring about the paradigm shift that we all expect to see in the larger context. So what does this concept, we probably need to rethink on what the idea of engendering forces and the national security implies, because we cannot rest on the fact that the legal framework now allows us to sit on the table and negotiate on the table and take decisions. But it all and also when women become a part of the forces and they have a cascading effect on the larger society, then how do they impact the society as such? In that sense, because then when we were interviewing women officers, they seem to be saying that there is no discrimination. We are like all men, and quote unquote, we are like men is extremely problematic. And that is something that I think is the next step towards towards looking at engendering national security. So probably what we need to do, therefore, is redefine the idea of national security. It is not enough to just have representation of women in leadership position, in parliament, in corporate houses, etc. But we need to we need to reinterpret the whole idea of what feminism needs to bring to the table. And this probably requires a lot of training and mentoring. Just before the speaker was talking about how she talks to her children about rape and violence, a more structured way of training, mentoring, and capacity building needs to be brought in place in order to actually realize the goal of feminist security as such. And this is not possible unless we create considerable public opinion and pressure that the existing definitions of national security are incomplete and incomprehensive in their nature. I think with that, I will close. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for such detailed session. I really liked your perspective on incorporating feminist approaches to security, focusing on human security and the well-being of marginalized groups, providing a, refreshing take on moving beyond traditional and state-centered paradigms. And I really liked your point about the women forces in the paramilitary as well. So I would like to invite Professor Vibhuti Patel ji for her remarks now.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Manisha Madhava, for a brilliant presentation and also your last points to ponder. I would just like to say that challenging or internalized misogyny, whether it is in society or family or this thing, is a very, very difficult task. And that is why you have to catch them young. So even when they join the military forces or paramilitary forces, at that stage, how can we influence the syllabus? Because there was a time where police academy used to invite feminists for the syllabus, no? Whatever they have about the policing and all, they would do, but about the gender relations they were. So are there such democratic spaces open where we can bring this kind of changes in the indoctrination process?
So, ma'am, our own study of the Indian forces revealed that there is a complete gender blind spot as far as the forces are concerned. In fact, way back, I remember having read some military journals saying, we don't want women in the forces. Why do we need women at all in the forces? Now, things have changed from then to now. It is important to note that women's entry into the forces is also the result of political economy as such. Women are cheaper labor compared to men. The entire Agniveer scheme, for instance. And within the forces also, there is a rejection of the whole idea of women bringing something different to the table. In fact, the entire training and capacity building program in the forces focus on building masculine mentalities within women as such. So therefore, unless feminists actually knock the doors of the services, and there are increasing attempts because the forces also try to gain legitimacy because they run on the taxpayers' money. So they try to establish connects with schools, colleges, societies, etc. That perhaps could be one space that could be utilized to push in the idea that and it has to be incorporated within the training and capacity building program of the forces itself, whether it is the police, the army, or others. Women don't have to become men to perform their the language also becomes very important there, as the previous speaker was saying, that men are associated with efficiency. Women are associated with something called they are for public display or to give a more softer look to the forces as such. This needs to be questioned. And it can be questioned at various forums where the state, the military, and the civil society are interacting. There are few such spaces, but there are spaces available, especially because the forces need to legitimize. So therefore, I think that is one avenue that is open. The other thing that Global South is different from the more developed country is in the Global South, integration of women does not happen before. Actually, it is incorporation which happens before. Representation takes place because there are some state policies, there are political dynamics involved. So symbolic representation emerges, but there is no attempt at integrating feminist philosophies and ideas within the forces itself, and that becomes a very important challenge that needs to be addressed also by feminists. My whole point is that we've achieved so much. Now we need to decide on what next we need to do. Because just having women, I think I think Mona from Pakistan also said, having women in parliament doesn't serve a purpose. Yes, they are lone voices, they're fighters, and that is very important. Symbolism has its place, but we have to strategize the next level of intervention. And the spaces for that, as you very rightly point out, are very limited, but they are still available, especially in the more developed countries of the world as such.
But I think we also have symbolism where person like a veteran Gandhi and Nirmala Deshpande, she walked from Delhi to Karachi, and reciprocally Asma Jahangiri, the founder of Women Action Forum from Pakistan, she walked from Karachi to Delhi. You may call it symbolism, but it was a brave thing, not walking for 350 kilometers, the peace walk. They had, and that was the time both the countries were so jingoistic. They were just making, all the politicians and army men were making statements after statements to destroy each other. No, so in the midst of jingoism, these two women, frail women, but they made such a. So I think this type of symbolism also we need to, I think, what amplify the voices and also tell the stories. These are some of the very empowering and inspiring stories. I think someone should make a film also on.
But there's a little catch in that. Often the state uses the symbolism to actually, project itself. A woman taking, the commandant, or for instance, the chief of naval staff, who was appointed, immediately is linked to the policies of the state. The policies sometimes of individuals also, individual political leaders also. So while these are heroic acts and they need to be welcomed and they need to be applauded at every point, we also need to find ways wherein it just does not remain tokenism as such. And the credit for it does not go to, is not encashed for political purposes as such.
Thank you so much.
Janki, would you like to speak? Janki, are you there? Hello, Janki and Daria, you have asked 2 questions. Yeah. Professor Mariam is asking.
No, Prof, I don't have a question. I was just shifting from my desktop to my mobile unit because I'll be driving for the next few minutes. Apologies for that.
No, I missed. Okay. Does anyone wants to ask question or share experiences? Because we have participants from several Asian countries, so you can even tell your dilemmas or success stories or localized way of implementing feminist
Hello,
policy.
thank you. I am Nalini from Sri Lanka. I am from war-affected location. What I want to share, like, in the armed group, LTT and all other armed group, they had women. They encouraged women to join. So that time we all felt, very good. So yeah, equality is there. But after the war ended, now all those female, especially female ex-combat who are disabled are neglected and excluded from the society. The society which, celebrated them as a brave women, now they became unwanted women. So now reflecting on the political scenario, like when all these armed group leaders are entered into politics, like last 1.5 decade, but none of those women are included until today. This going to be election on December 14th, but they are not giving even nomination. This is for the human resource. They want numbers, is what happened in the World War. They wanted women labor.
Yeah.
So second one is you talk about 13% women in the Indian military. But here also, even in police or anywhere, we can see the division of labor, which they appoint women to write cases, soft job, like woman. You are a woman, you do this kind of thing. So this is very much, contradicting. And also one more thing I want to bring to this table, this National Action Plan. Yeah, we all have beautiful plans, but we are not implementing because we don't have funds. Even UN bring 1325, but they don't give resources to implement that plan or to monitor that plan. So this is very much, pushing us back. Also, I want to, in 2004 peace talk, because of the resolution came up, they put from LTT and the Sri Lankan government as a tokenism. It's like I always say, it's flower pot, just to show in the stage, but nothing happened. This Afghan peace talk or Sri Lankan peace talk. So why we don't, the peace talk didn't, capitalizing in, success, because there was no women to talk about their needs. So this is my women, peace and security in my piece of cake. And I am also advocating for reducing the military expenditure by 5% and transfer it to the social security and security of the women. And at last, I just want to reiterate Anuradha Chenoy, she spoke on some other platform when I was there. Because national security, we all are selling defense budget for national security, where our women and children and girls are in danger. They are being killed, they are being raped. Who are nations? We are the nation. So we are not protected. So we need to question this, and we need to keep on talking and advocating for peace and security of women. Thank you so much for giving opportunity to share my experience.
But even feminists in Sri Lanka also said that women, especially the suicide bombers and all, they were used as a cannon fodder, to settle the account between different factions as well as,
Definitely, that's a question I asked with all the political party. Women who were bold enough to come as a suicide bombers, why they are not entering into politics? When we asked this time also, nomination, now nobody's in nomination. Oh, nobody's coming. It's very difficult to look for them. I said, they came to die. So they are bold enough to die. That means you are forced them. Not like they are willing to join. So they can, they're all, these all female ex-combatant, they have gone to the traditional gender norm and cooking, cleaning, looking after children, going to temple and everything. They forgot about what they have been taught and how they've been doing. So this is, the world is using women and using women as a laborers, cheap labor and doing the gender norms, whatever we are social.
There can be only collective solution to money, mafia, muscle, and misogyny. These are the 4 M's which women have to combat when you are in public life, and there can't be individual solution. There will be only witch hunting, then witch killing.
I think we all, who are the participants, we all have to work together to advocate and keep raising these voices for peace and security of the whole, the planet. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Shreya Pandeyji, can you unmute and speak?
Thank you so much, ma'am. This was a very, very good session. My question is to Professor Manisha. Ma'am, actually, I'm a student of international relations, so I have been looking at how we formulate public policy as well as foreign policy making. And since I've been studying European Union, what I see is that the input that goes into making of policy or foreign policy in EU or in the Western countries is so very different from what happens in India. We take very, very impulsive decisions which does not factor in any kind of research. For instance, the Europeans, for deciding small little things, they look at the perceptions, research, surveys that are being carried out in the third partner country, so that they can make very, very robust policies, external policies. But as far as India is concerned, we see how decisions are made, and we also know how decisions are made when we try to find solutions to conflicts. I have met and interviewed a few people who have been actually very young army men who were working for this Congo peace mission. And, he was very candid in saying that this is basically an ongoing business and nobody is going to bring an end to it. So I'm a little pessimistic, but I feel, there are many, many talking shops, and we also like it when we can, ventilate our grievances and our frustration. But I wonder that, when it matters the most, the people who really take the decision, I somehow find them to be very rigid regarding their position. They are hardly aware of what is happening. We say India is young and dynamic, but what percolates, and what I have also read a bit about foreign policy, is that we are very, very stagnant. Are we really going to factor in feminism when it comes to foreign policy making? I mean, the answer might be yes, but I don't know how frequently we can do it. I think there needs to be a very strong emphasis from the top. I mean, PM onwards, the entire Council of Ministers should take a stand. And again, the very theme of this entire workshop, a feminist foreign policy, is actually what we require. Your views on this, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shreya, and I empathize with your frustrations at the gatekeeping that happens within India's institutional structures, and that's precisely the problem. The problem is at the level of institutionalization, and that we have the institutional structures that exist. Traverse between traditional norms and modern rule making structures as such, and therefore what we see therefore is that these institutions are not sufficiently open to the larger, or these institutions do not function in the way in which we expect them to function. We consider them to be non-responsive. And now these are non-responsive precisely because they aim at reproducing the same structures of power that exist, and therefore there is a very strong gatekeeping that happens. So what is true of foreign policy is also true of our society, of our families, of our of a larger ecosystem as such. And perhaps our only way out is to keep talking about this, and probably when we keep talking about it, that we create more spaces of accountability, of transparency, of voicing of opinion. We can hope. Democracy is a work in progress, right? And we can't afford to give up as such, despite the shortcomings of the system as such. I don't know whether that answers the question, but
ma'am, it does. Ma'am, it does. And thank you so much. I just want to ask you a very small follow-up question. I'm no Prashant Bhushan, of course, but wouldn't it actually help PM Modi that if he comes all out in favor of women, and इतना तो वो बोलते हैं, मतलब he venerates so many gods, mother goddess, everything, and he speaks. I mean, if he really takes up this issue, don't you think this will be a plus for him? I don't know how. No, I don't think so. Maybe no, I'm wrong.
So it definitely makes political capital, and it stops at making political capital as such. I hope you understand what I mean. I think I don't need to elaborate on that.
So I think Professor Janki wants to speak, but she's not able to switch on her audio.
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Vibhuti,
yeah.
can
Now
you-
we can hear you. Yes, yes, we can hear you. Yes.
All right. Yeah. So I mean, I think we've had a series of wonderful sort of lectures and so on, and I am really something that I'm struggling to figure out is if, as a group or as a collective, if we were to actually work on feminist foreign policy, what is it that it would look like? If I want to take up, let's say I'm well connected with Ministry of External Affairs and I want to advocate, what would it look like? What is my agenda point, So I don't know if we have something like that, because yes, we have seen a lot of analysis of the situation as it is, brilliant analysis, the challenges and so on and so forth, and also a fair bit of theorization in terms of the value base from where we come. But given all of that, what I'm really wanting to hear or gain is what does a feminist foreign policy look like, and what is it that we ought to be doing? So it's not necessarily to Manisha, but it can be, I think it's a more generic sort of a question, which I hope through the lectures we will have some enlightenment on that. Because I think the purpose also is this, that yes, we are all scattered. We understand there is a very strong feminist movement. Many of us are part of it. But then when we talk about feminist foreign policy, I think we are treading on sort of thin ice, and the agendas sort of get muddied in that sense. The water gets muddied. And is there any sort of crystallization of thought there? Or what, how, or do we sort of, I think one of your research work that you have given us is to be able to look at a policy and say, okay, how does it, what does feminist foreign policy look like with regard to that particular policy? So, but I think some pointers and so on would be useful. And my second sort of suggestion to Manisha was, when you were talking about all that goes on within the armed forces and women, I came across a really wonderful, heartwarming novel called She's a Jolly Good Fellow, written by a woman who was in short service commission for 5 years, Shrija Nair, and it really makes, it's a very grounded sort of a book. And essentially the novel is about two women, one who is very, as you might call, masculine, but in the army they call it OG, is olive green, which is very kadak in terms of following all the rules. And the other friend of hers uses her femininity to get out of a whole lot of activities that the men in the armed forces are expected to perform, and they're all officer level people. So it's a very interesting a novel which brings out the tensions very well. And I sort of very often, when I meet people in the armed forces, I sort of recommend that they read it, because it sensitizes without being pedantic. So I just thought it's a short chota book hai. It's easily available, but might be interesting. Okay, I'll stop there.
Is also so attractive. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for those suggestions. And I think, as you very rightly say, that there has been no significant attempt at conceptualizing feminist foreign policy as such. And all that we have been doing so far is pointing, what works for us and what does not work for us as such. But I think in forums like this, we can sort of start the process of creating a template of what feminist foreign policy should look like. But the basic ideas are very much there, and we have many to emulate also. And one being, which I have touched upon in my lecture today, that it needs to go beyond mere tokenism as such. It needs to bring fundamental issues of women's security, which is concerned with their larger well-being on the agenda as such, on the table as such. And because it is never there on the table, women's security is never there on the table. At the most, sexual assault, weaponization of women finds occasional mentions, and that also finds mention when you want to keep women out of the forces. One of the arguments that was given for not allowing women to enter into combat position is, what if they are captured by the enemy army? Therefore, therefore we need to take this debate beyond just the matrix of representation, presence in leadership position also. I think we need to shift the focus back to not individual, but issues as such. So if feminist foreign policy, to me, has to be based on the idea of rejection of violence in any sense of the term. It has to be based on flow of resources for community building, which would prevent any kind of future violences. We can go on expanding the list, but from these critiques would emerge probably a better understanding. Most of the time, the debate begins and ends with representation of women in leadership position, representation of women at the entry level. Now the entry level has been crossed, so now it's all about whether they are there at top positions. Women don't. There is always a glass ceiling in civil society, as in the forces, as also. But even those who are there on top, do they voice feminist concerns? In fact, there may be men who may be voicing feminist concerns. So we have to do some kind of gendering of the whole debate itself, and we have to make allies and men also. So irrespective of who is there on the top, the values keep being put forth. And thank you for those wonderful suggestions. I'm sure all the students would like to read that book. I'm glad that you pointed that out. I've read that book and I've enjoyed reading it thoroughly. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. There's one last question by Dr. Amita Marwahaji. I request you to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. Hello, good evening, ma'am. I'm Dr. Amita Marwa from IT College, Lucknow. Hello, Professor Vibhuti, ma'am. Hello, Professor Manisha. Ma'am, my question is, because not only am I an economics lecturer, but I'm also very interested in politics. And as you must be following it, most of the Europe is now being taken up with a right-wing policy. Now, Sweden Prime Minister has made a statement, she's also a female, a couple of days back, that if the migrants cannot, keep up with our traditions, please don't come. Now, these kinds of statements are made by the leaders who are actually supposed to be, taking up feminist foreign policies. They are the leaders, right? They are the ones we are looking up to. Now, but the right-wing policies and the local policies and the local elections seems to be, pushing them into making these kinds of statements. So local interests are taking up more, I think, they are giving more importance to the local interests as compared to these kinds of things. And so if any woman who's wearing a burqa and is actually want to follow their own traditions, they have to face a lot of racism. In Germany, when the women actually went wearing a burqa and went to the went for swim, specifically they actually went for on a beach. They just wanted to spend a time. There was a police came and they said, "How dare you came here? Why are you wearing all this?" So how do we reconcile with all these kinds of things? And we are facing not only these kinds of statements abroad, but within the country also. I think that student who was pointing out and was actually expressing frustration she wanted to express these kinds of things only, ma'am. So how do we reconcile and how do we safeguard these women who are actually migrating and because of the developed countries' policies only. So what is happening in Syria, the local population is not responsible for that. It's all the international population which is international policies which are responsible, and they are the ones who are paying the price. So how do we reconcile with this?
Thank you, Dr. Amita. These are some very fundamental questions that political scientists are grappling with no answers as such. If you notice carefully in the last decade or so, there has been a fundamental shift in the nature of politics, and the center of the politics has now moved more towards the right. Uh, and 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 the right is also a product of neoliberalism, market economy. If you read, there was a wonderful editorial by Ajay Gudavarti called "Market Without Morals" in the Telegraph a couple of days back, and it talks about how these conservative value systems have made a comeback because of the insecurities that have been produced by the market as such. And therefore, even the so-called left or the progressives seem to be responding only to these things, and to some extent, fail to respond to these, to some extent, the liberals themselves are responsible for this crisis that liberalism faces. I mean, when you talk about genocide, when you talk of rise of right, it is all about emergence of conservatism, which is just the opposite of what liberalism talks about: inclusiveness, diversity, etc. So therefore, the liberal agenda was not quick enough to respond to the insecurities that globalization was producing: loss of jobs, loss of, in culture, families found stability. In their traditions, families looked for stability. And liberals began to challenge these traditions without probably providing rational alternatives, which would assuage that sense of insecurity that globalization was creating, which economic hire and fire, and depressions, and loss of jobs were creating. And therefore now where we stand is that liberal philosophy stands discredited, but an alternative philosophy has not emerged. So I will be positive and optimistic enough to say that probably this is a transition phase. And in every transition phase, the conservative elements resurface, religion resurfaces, xenophobia resurfaces. This has happened in several times in history. And probably we will, in course of time, see probably a role or rethinking on what conservatism is doing to us as human beings. But until then, we have to have patience. Probably we have to have patience.
But I think we will have to challenge all. It's not only the right wings who are doing. After the Ukraine crisis or after the Gaza this thing, and the stand which the Western countries have taken, and also Sri Lankan crisis, the China's role. You just now the ideological demarcation, I think they have blurred when it comes to sectarian interest.
Correct. And I think we need to probably voice these, or keep voicing these dissatisfactions of what is happening in Palestine or in Ukraine, or what happened in America also. And much of this has to take place among like-minded people in our, maybe we can call them our own echo chambers, but these echo chambers would be critical in shaping the nature of future politics as such. Again, these are tough times, and these are uncertain times. More than tough times, these are uncertain times.
And these echo chambers can also have amplifier.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yes,
Absolutely. So,
Thank you. It was beautifully
Thank you.
answered. Thanks, ma'am.
Yeah, good. Thank you. Mhm.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for answering all the questions. Now I would like to invite Vibhuti, ma'am, to kindly share closing remarks for the day.
Yeah, I think today we really had a very mind-blowing sessions. All three of them were excellent in their presentation of the issues and issues of peace and security, which they try to redefine to register the aspiration and interest of women. And Dr. Chenoy, Professor Chenoy also said that just add and stir approach makes only statistical charts look good, but do not challenge the power asymmetry. And women will continue with the status quo as perpetuators of the patriarchy as they get co-opted in the men's world. So what we need is a paradigm shift. Another issue that emerged was that there are women in international relations who speak in a different voices as they balance both the normative and realistic impulses of foreign policy. We have seen many such experiences in African countries, and Dr. Siddharth brought out so many emulating and inspiring examples, and they have been able to push envelope in framing the issues on national interest or peace and security. And it happened in case of Fatima Siddharth also, who campaigned against the Israel, and she demanded that hold Israel accountable. So this kind of pressure generated by the grassroots feminist movement in South Africa also empowered and also made the politicians to take up a lead in the International Criminal Court, which was a very, very landmark intervention that we saw in the recent past. Another issue is that of the question of a flight mode or flight mode. So she said that yes, what we need is a fight mode for women, peace and security agenda. The flight mode is going to be very dangerous. We can't be the mute spectator. Some of the feminist agenda that is interrogating the state-centric and military-centric notion of security that has been happening since 2000 after the UNSC accepted WPC agenda. The questioning of realism and zero-sum approach, which I think was told very, very convincingly, it was shared by Professor in the day two. And the critique of war and the cultures of militarism, violence, muscular populism, nuclearization, gendering of citizenship, that is also what we see in so many countries that is happening, and the whole prevalence of male-dominated institutions that provides basis for patriarchal systems of power and masculinized environment to thrive in a facilitating rape culture and weaponization of sexual violence as an instrument of war that we have been hearing again and again in all war crime tribunals. The universal wartime sexual violence led to creation of a solidarity networks that also we have seen as a form of collective healing space and empowerment of survivors. And the new slogan that emerged was that women's security is a national security. I think here it is shared. Someone had shared it in the chat box also. So from the defense of the state to the security of the marginalized individual, that is the process in which the paradigm shift has happened, and because of the people's pressure from below. So women who are grounded and enjoy popular mandate can succeed in bringing their voice to say bear on the conduct and analysis of diplomacy and also international relations as experienced in so many Latin American countries in the recent past. Dr. Seedat very sharply, she said that we don't want bootlickers of capitalist patriarchy and being based in the international relations. What we need is those in the diplomatic screw as well as the international relations who are accountable to the people, who believe in justice and peace and who believe in expansion of the horizons of security from national security to the human security. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, ma'am. And with this, I proceed with the formal vote of thanks. As we conclude day 4 session of Feminist Foreign Policy Fellowship, an online international winter school program, a 3-month immersive online introductory leadership certificate training fellowship program, I, Fiza Mahajan, visiting researcher at IMPRI, would like to express my gratitude on behalf of the Asia Foundation, New Delhi, IMPRI Center for International Relations and Strategic Studies, and IMPRI Gender Impact Studies Center, New Delhi. I would like to thank our chair, Professor Vibhuti Patel, and the experts for today, Professor Anuradha Chenoy, Professor Mariam Seedat-Khan, and Dr. Manisha Madhava for taking out their valuable time and for thought-provoking insights on the topics. We would like to thank our participants for raising important questions and contributing to the thoughtful dialogue that is essential to this fellowship. And we look forward to seeing you all on November 15th for our next session, which will feature Professor Manisha Desai and Ms. Rita Manchanda, followed by the project discussion by the team at IMPRI. Thank you all for your engagement today. We hope that this fellowship will be a transformative and enriching experience for each of you. Have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you, Fiza Mahaji. Yeah,
Thank
for
you.
moderating the session so well. There is a request from one participant. She wants all the 3 days videos, which were already shared. So if she's... Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you.